You are listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 409.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How's everybody doing today? Hope you are all doing well. We're having our first really hot days here in Kentucky, as many of you are across the country. Of course, it is summertime, so here in Kentucky, 90-degree weather is not unusual. This is the perfect time of year, though, to be in my cookbook bunker because it's in the lower level of the building and it's always nice and cool down here. I look forward to finishing up here with my podcast episodes, getting them processed, and then heading out to my container gardens and patio to water and feed my plants, and just have been really enjoying that this summer. Tons of blooms on our geraniums, our window boxes. Our tomatoes have lots of green fruit, not quite ripe yet, and we got a lot of basil, and maybe I'll have some of that on some pasta for dinner tonight. Also out in the front of the house, I have 3 really nice hydrangea bushes. And I don't know if you know anything about hydrangeas, but there's different types of hydrangeas that bloom off of old wood or new growth. And it's always kind of a tricky thing to figure out when to prune hydrangeas. But the type that we have in the front grow off of brand new growth. So the blooms form from things that are shooting up out of the ground brand new. So every spring, before anything sprouts, we prune them back, and we have got the most gorgeous blooms on those hydrangeas this year. I even did the hydrangea food, sprinkle it around the base of the plant, and it makes the soil more acidic, so some of the blooms turn a blue color, just like our chemistry classes in high school where we did the acid and base testing with the little test strips. Kind of a similar thing happens to hydrangea blooms going from pink to blue. So it's been interesting to do that. And I think I'm going to clip some of those so that I have some flowers in my kitchen before they wilt. But I do try to water those in the morning, and they usually hold up pretty well, even in the summer heat. So that's a little bit of an update from me here in Kentucky with my warm weather and plants and garden. And I'm excited today to have an interview for you with Irene Yoo. Irene is a food writer, recipe developer, chef, and co-owner of Orion Bar in Bushwick, Brooklyn. She is the author of the brand new book, Soju Party, How to Drink and Eat Like a Korean, a guide to Korean-style drinking and eating. This book is structured as a progressive night out and is recently awarded a James Beard Award in the Beverage with Recipes book category, competing against other cocktail books. So it's an honor to have Irene on the show today to discuss her book, and we cover the cultural rituals of Korean-style drinking. We follow the structure of the book in our conversation, which mirrors a full night out all the way through hangover recovery the next day. We talk about recipes, we talk about infusions, as well as the role of her family in helping her shape the book. Her sister helped with the illustrations. Her mother played a role in the recipes in the book, and this parallels her experience of also writing a cookbook alongside running a bar. So it was really a great conversation with Irene. We talk about so many things related to the pillars of Korean drinking, all the way through everything from games that people play to karaoke, and the whole section on food and bar snacks. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. And without further delay, let's dive into the interview with Irene Yoo. Hi, Irene. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Hello. It's so nice to be on.
Yes, welcome. So excited to have you here. Can't wait to talk all about your beautiful new book and many more things. But before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
My name is Irene Yoo. I am a food writer and recipe developer. I'm also chef and co-owner of Orion Bar in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And I'm also the author of Soju Party, which is a cookbook about how to drink and eat like a Korean.
Yes, amazing. And before we dive into talking specifically about the book, we do offer you our congratulations on the winning of your James Beard Award.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your experience with the awards and when you found out you were nominated and what it was like to go through that process.
I would say like getting a James Beard Award nomination is something that has always been a goal, but also felt like something that would never happen. I was just like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be nominated? And so, yeah, we submitted this book to the awards, and I was actually in Korea when I got news of the nomination, which I, again, knew, like I knew the schedule.
Yeah.
I knew it was happening when I was in Korea, but look with the time difference, because it's like night in Korea when it's day here. I like just went to sleep and I figured I would find out in the morning. And I had a dream in the middle of the night that I had gotten a nomination.
Oh.
And so when I woke up, I was like, oh, well, that wasn't real. Surely that is a disappointment. And then I looked at my phone and it was real. And so all these people had texted me and gotten like emails and like posts being like, I got nominated. So that was really wild, especially to learn about it in Korea, especially since this book is about like drinking and eating in Korea. So it felt very apropos. And again, that was like my goal. It wasn't winning. It was just to be nominated. And I was really excited about that.
Yes.
So the awards was really crazy because we flew in the day of, like a couple hours before. And then we were running late to the ceremony. I thought for sure I wouldn't make it. I also didn't realize I was the very first award. So it was just like such a crazy, like high-low experience. And then suddenly we got there, the award ceremony started, and then I was the first award. So it was like really amazing, like such a high. And then it was great because then I could go give my speech, and then I didn't have anything else to worry about for the rest of the ceremony or the rest of the weekend.
Yeah, and you can just enjoy the other people getting their awards and the festivities. What category were you in for the awards?
So this was up for the beverage with recipes.
Nice.
So there's a beverage without recipes, beverage with recipes. And since mine is a cookbook with recipes for both drinks and food, it was up against some amazing other cocktail books. So I feel really honored to have one.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I would love to know, you said before that we talked about the awards that you were a food writer and you own a bar. Let's talk about what it's like to not only be a food writer, but own a physical space where people can come and drink.
I think that, so the two ended up happening hand in hand, us building this bar and me writing this cookbook. So a lot of the recipes were developed in tandem. I think it really helps to cement sort of the concept as a whole. Like I really wanted to have a space that people could come and experience Korean style drinking, but then also have a way for people who might maybe don't have access to these spaces or soju or things like that, like to be able to recreate it at home. So the cookbook is very much like how to have a soju party at home, but also sort of demystifying what it's like to go and order soju or have the entire like Korean drinking experience, whether you're going to like Korean barbecue or going to Korea. It sort of explains the whole concept. And then with Orion Bar, really wanted it to be a place that would both meld the Korean drinking experience with the American drinking experience. So we call it a Korean and American bar. It has a lot of like classic cocktails with Korean influences. You can get like beer shots and natural wine, which are American style drinks that I really love, in addition to soju and makgeolli and Korean beers.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think that one of the things that makes the writing of a cookbook such an experiential thing is when you're actually kind of living what you're doing, because you had lived these types of evenings when you were in Korea, but then being able to recreate them for people and then write about them. I always think it makes it a lot easier when you're in the middle of doing it yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because, if you think, okay, I got to remember what I did in Korea and how this went. I mean, you certainly can remember, but there's certain things that just happen in the moment that you can pick up the details of or the story of. That's so much easier when we're actually living what we're writing.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really enjoyable for like patrons of the bar too, is it's a lot of people who maybe gone to visit or travel in Korea and had that experience and wanting to sort of recreate that or revisit that back home in America. So I was really hoping that both the bar and the book would be a space and a way to do that.
Yes, that's a great way to capture the memories and, like you said, recreate it at home. I find that people that they go to a restaurant, they go to a bar, they go to a bakery. A book is such a great way to help people remember that experience. And for you, this experience is not necessarily about a place, although you have a place, but about this whole concept of drinking like you do in Korea. So I would like to pretend that none of us that you are talking to know what this is all about. And that's the purpose of the book. But I think I'd love for you to walk us through the evening and the journey from arriving and, what we might experience so that we can hear about this on the podcast and then, of course, enjoy it in your book.
Yeah. So Korean style drinking is very much it's very structured in the beginning. And the idea is that there are sort of these rules and rituals that within our culture, like we're expected to follow. And so I really wanted the book to just be like an introduction to that. For example, you might order a few bottles of soju or makgeolli, which is a Korean rice wine, or again, beer or whatever you're drinking that night. And you always pour for each other. There's a bit of a general like age-based or like society-based hierarchy that you follow in terms of the order that you pour in. You always have to have food when you're drinking. You don't usually just go to a bar and have like a drink each. There always has to be like food. You're sitting at a table, you're sharing. And I feel like that's really the nature and purpose of it too. Again, as you're drinking, you're sort of breaking down these boundaries and these barriers. So maybe in the beginning, you're being really formal about pouring for each other. But as the night goes on and you're bonding and getting closer, you can be a lot more lax about that because now we're drinking more as friends rather than, let's say, colleagues or strangers. And so a lot of Korean nights out are structured in what's called 1차, 2차, or like first round, second round. And the purpose of that is sort of give a change in scenery, go to a different spot, try something else. So it's a great way to go to like 3 or 4 different spots in one night. And I kind of structured the book in a similar way too, is like the first round kind of eases you into what is Korean style drinking. And then you kind of level up. There's recipes for more complex cocktails. There's lots of recipes, again, for food, or anju, which is Korean for drinking food. And then most key, I feel like it is not a complete drinking night out if you do not resolve your hangover. So there's a whole hangover section. And that's also the crucial part of why we're eating in general. Is to stave off our hangover. And then at the end, you're definitely feeding your hangover, whether it's the night of or the next morning.
Yeah. It's fascinating. You said that. Just this past weekend, I was with my family and we were going to go to a brewery. It was in Louisville, Kentucky, and they didn't have any food. And it's so common in U.S. breweries. And I'm thinking they should have, now sometimes they'll have like bags of chips on the wall. Maybe a popcorn machine, something like that. Maybe
give me a pretzel at least.
Exactly. And I think that it must be because, and you might know this better as a bar owner in the U.S., if it has to do with food preparation areas, food preparation, the health department inspection. I'm not really sure, but why a bar wouldn't choose to do it? What would the reason for that be in the U.S.?
I think it's a bit more about margins. As like a bar and restaurant owner, your margins are much higher selling alcohol than it is food, because food requires a lot more people.
Yeah.
Food costs are expensive, whereas alcohol, it's not. In Korea too, I think Korea is not the only country that is like this. I think, like, for example, whenever I go to England, like the drinking culture is so different than American drinking culture.
Yeah.
So I think similarly, it's a lot more accepted and casual to drink, let's say, with your family or out at a restaurant or at 11 in the morning.
Yeah.
So it's sort of restaurants are a natural entry point to be able to drink. And a lot of places have more of like a food minimum than a drink minimum.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's the drinking age in Korea?
It's a bit younger. It is, well, Korean age is a weird thing. It used to be like when you were born, you're like 1 year old instead of 0 years old. So it's 19, which is technically 18, but then they recently changed the law, but they're sticking to 19. So now it's like the true international age of 19.
Yeah, it used to be, I live in Kentucky, used to be 18 here back until the 80s at some point. We were talking about this weekend also. I was with a bunch of my sisters and we were at a family wedding, and one of them distinctly remembered when it switched from 18 to 21. You know, my mom always felt, though, if we were with the family, she also said people enter the Army at 18. There's so many things that people are already doing that have entered them into adulthood and actually were legally adults at the age of 18. So she never really understood why they raised it to 21. But anyway, that's what they did.
I feel the same way about like renting cars.
Yeah.
Like, why is it 25?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what has unlocked in our brain between 18 and 25 and 21 and 25? That's suddenly
actually,
we're like, okay,
I
now we can like take ownership of a car.
Exactly. It should probably be more locked at 25 than the people that are younger probably are a little safer with them. So I don't know. It is kind of interesting to think about. Now, you went through the 4 different the pillars of Korean drinking. You mentioned the soju. What's the base of soju for is it a grain or is it a fruit?
Traditionally, it's distilled with rice and nuruk, which is a wild Korean fermentation starter, kind of like similar to koji, I would say, in Japanese culture.
Yeah.
However, a lot of the green bottle soju that you see out in the market is much more like commercially manufactured. It's more of like ethanol that's mixed with sweeteners. So it's not really traditionally distilled. It's a little bit more, commercially manufactured.
Yeah. And then you have beer. What's the second pillar? So
beer is usually very light beer. I would say it's like more akin to like a Bud or Coors.
Nice.
Very like light, good to drink while eating food.
Yeah. And then you have the lightly filtered rice wine, and then the foods, the anju. Right. So those are the 4 pillars. So let's start with the first round. And if there's food along with that, or what people are typically drinking during this first round or this first part of the evening.
I mean, the rounds are very casual. Like, it's not like you have to actually follow, like you drink this in this round and that in the next round. But let's say you are starting off. I personally like to start off with soju because it gives you a little bit of like an alcohol boost. Maybe you're also pairing that with dinner. Or alternatively, maybe you're like going and having like a glass of makgeolli at like a fancy makgeolli bar and having a little bit of snacks while you wait for, let's say, your table at a dinner reservation. And always there is food that is paired with different alcohols. I would say that like soju really goes with everything because it's a very neutral tasting alcohol, but it's really good with like spicy food, really good with grilled meats. Makgeolli, which is the lightly filtered rice wine, that has a lot more traditional pairings because it's actually Korea's oldest alcohol. And it's also a little bit more of like a farmer's wine. So I would say like a lot more traditional Korean foods are often paired with makgeolli. Things like pan-fried chon, which is kind of like a pancake, or also definitely things like pork belly, steamed pork belly. It's really good with anything where the sort of creaminess of makgeolli can be offset by like something maybe a little bit greasier.
Yeah.
And then beer, like classically, it's fried chicken. Lately, it's just something that, I mean, that I don't have to explain. It's just like the light carbonation of beer goes so well with that sort of like crispy fried fattiness of fried chicken.
Yeah. There's a brewery here I live in northern Kentucky now, outside of Cincinnati, and there's a brewery in Cincinnati that they have like a leased space inside the brewery for food, and it's a Korean chicken place, and you can get the beer with the Korean fried chicken. It is really tasty.
It's so good.
Yeah, really tasty. And then, so that's the first round. How do people generally feel if they're new to this about being served and about sharing?
I feel like people feel maybe like a little bit scared to be like, am I doing this right? But I think especially if you're drinking with other Koreans, they're just so excited for you to be a part of it and be interested in it, and are so like, it's more about like making sure you're taking care of each other rather than being like, oh, I messed up, or this is taboo, or it's taboo if you do something like this. And I think it's more like, we just don't want you to drink by yourself. We want us to all drink together.
100%.
And I think it's a little bit more of like acknowledging, like, I see you, I'm pouring your drink, I'm making sure you're having a good time, I'm making sure you're fed. It's a little bit more from that perspective. But I think it's like, especially from a Korean perspective, it's really fun to see people try different alcohols, different foods. And we just get really excited when people like take interest in our culture.
Yeah. And I think that's a great rule for drinking alcohol, is always sharing it with people. And it makes it a whole different experience than not. And I think that that's something, if people just keep it in the back of their mind, one of the purposes of it, and it just goes right along with the food and people together and celebrating even just an evening out and being together. So you mentioned pouring, though. Does that mean that everything arrives at the table in a bottle and then it's poured for other people into their glass?
Yes. So it's usually, you almost always order by the bottle. You don't really order individual drinks. So soju will come like cold, refrigerated, and then come with soju glasses. Soju glasses are 2 ounces, so they're just a little bit bigger than your traditional 1.5 ounce shot glasses. And then you pour for each other. Even with beers, it usually comes in, you can still get it in the cans, and you would do the same thing even if you were to get it in a individual can, but usually comes in larger share bottles. And then beer glasses are, I think they're like 200 or 250 milliliters. So they're a little bit smaller. I would say they're akin to like a small, like orange juice glass.
Yeah.
And then you would also pour in that. And then the key, and the reason why this is all served at the table, is because you can then make your own drinks. They're called somex. I call it the Korean unofficial national cocktail, but you mix soju and beer or mixju together into those glasses. So then you're kind of either mixing something less alcoholic with soju, or vice versa, making beer a little bit more alcoholic by mixing it with soju.
Yeah. What's the percent alcohol of soju?
Soju ranges from 12% to, all the way up to 40%. The classic green bottles you see are usually 12 to max 19%.
Yeah.
But the traditionally distilled soju, which is definitely like coming back, especially through like the craft soju movement. That definitely can go up to 40%. I've even seen like 60%.
Yeah. So that's a pretty wide range. I guess people would know. Is there different names for it? It's just soju across the board.
Yeah, it's soju across the board, but I would say you can definitely differentiate by green bottle soju, which all looks like very similar to each other, and just the labels are different. Those will all range between like 12 and 19%.
Yeah.
So you can kind of think about that as being the same alcohol percentage as wine. And again, we pour it in shot glasses, and the idea is you're supposed to take full or half shots at a time. So it's not really like a sipping alcohol. It's more of a shooting alcohol. And then anything that's more traditionally distilled, you would also be served in like a glass similarly, but I think that is like a little bit more, you're meant to enjoy it. It's a little bit more expensive price point. And also, I think you would know immediately that it was stronger.
No, you can definitely tell difference between a distilled spirit that's 40% versus one that's more just like a wine at 12 to 19%.
Exactly.
And people would mix either of those with the beer then. Putting a spirit in a beer is not uncommon here in the US even, things like My son went to Purdue University. They have Boilermakers, it was like lager beer with a shot of whiskey in it. I'm sure the Irish have something. I don't know what it's exactly called.
I think it's called an Irish car bomb.
Yeah. So,
they have like Jaeger bombs. Yeah.
Yes.
The bomb shots, there's a whole chapter for that in the book too. It's amazing how many different versions there are. There's like elaborate like stacking of glasses inside of glasses, or a lot of like performative things you can do, like lining up glasses and then lining up shot glasses on top of them and knocking them all in, which I call a soul train, or you can also call like a soju domino. So yeah, I think that's part of the fun of it too, is, once you sort of get past the ritual of like we're pouring for each other, then it's just like, let's go crazy. Let's have a party.
Yeah. And then what about the rice wine? How is that served at the table?
That is usually classically served in a copper kettle with copper bowls that sort of reference rice bowls. And that kind of ties back to the fact that makgeolli used to be more of like a farmer's wine. Its basis is also rice, and it's just something you could ferment and make just really quickly at home within like a week's time. But it's also something, conversely, you have to drink very quickly because it keeps fermenting and then is no longer good. So yeah, it's usually poured out of a kettle, which I think is a really nice vibe.
Yeah. And it keeps fermenting, you say?
It can, yeah. I think it's like similar to kombucha. Yeah, where it's like if you don't pasteurize it, it'll keep fermenting, especially if you're making it at home. But yeah, so it's something you definitely want to drink as soon as it's made. In Korea, it's made a lot more easily. You can get so many different types of makgeolli across the country. Here, it's a little bit harder to get imported makgeolli for this reason. It keeps fermenting, or it's pasteurized, which kind of alters the flavor. But there are a lot more makers in America who have started to brew their own makgeolli.
Yeah, very good. So this is the first part of the evening. Tell us what happens next.
So afterwards, you would probably let's say, I think it sort of follows the natural progression of your eating. Like you've ordered some dishes and then you finish eating them. So naturally you would be like, okay, well, let's go to the next spot. Yeah. And I think this is a part that really like baffles people. And even me, whenever I go back to Korea, I'm like, how on earth could I still be eating more food? But you go to the next spot and you order maybe more soju. Maybe you go to a cocktail bar. Even if you go to like a cocktail bar, which is something that's on the rise in Korea, they're still at least giving you bar snacks, even if it's something as simple as peanuts or even like these like little like stir-fried fishies. There's always something. They will never leave you empty-handed. And the more you drink, the more you'll realize like how imperative that is. Sometimes it's just like a little bit of like a fidget thing. You're just like, well, you're chatting and it's like, peanuts, like you just pop them in your mouth and then all of a sudden the bowl is gone. So yeah, I think that would be kind of the next round. And then I think you would definitely maybe like go to, then you're feeling good and then you might go to like karaoke and have another round.
Yeah. And when you're at the second round, is the pouring still the same, or are you serving just individual drinks from the bar? Or ordering
the pouring is always the same.
Okay.
Especially if you're maintaining like drinking soju or makgeolli. Again, like maybe you're going to a cocktail bar, and I think in Korea, a lot more like Western style drinking has become popular. So if you went to a cocktail bar, you would be ordering your own individual cocktails, not pouring cocktails for each other in that way. But yeah, it's always the same until you get too inebriated to maintain it.
Yeah. And then you're like, okay, pouring isn't part of what we're going to be doing. Yeah.
So it's not the priority here.
Yeah. So you talk about, in the easy drinking part, you talk about shots, you talk about drinks and infusions. I'd love for you to, we kind of talked a little bit about the shots and the bomb shots, but the easy drinks and the infusions, what would be the difference between those two things?
So easy drinks, or what I also refer to as one plus ones, is a little bit more of a cocktail industry term. So that's like in America, if you went somewhere and you ordered like a gin and tonic or a vodka soda, it's like you're one alcohol and you're one mixer. So I wanted to provide some recipes for that. So most of those are recipes that I developed for this book, and a little bit more American style drinking applied to Korean alcohol. And then the infusions is one of my favorite kind of like secret chapters of this book. Infusing soju, what's also called 당금주, is something that's been around in Korean culture since like the Joseon Dynasty. It's been around forever. It was a way for people to make medicine, which again is how a lot of alcohol was invented. It was infusing herbs into alcohol to make tinctures to treat different like maladies. So that's how infused soju started. Classic versions that you might find in Korea are like ginseng infused soju or like jujube infused soju, these things that are just really easy to make at home. And like they provide, you can just go to like the supermarket and buy all the ingredients for it. They make infusion strength soju, which is stronger, usually about 30% alcohol, I think. And then you can get these like infusion jars, and then you buy whatever fruit or herb that you want and infuse that. So when I was developing recipes for this book, I was like, this is such an easy thing to do. Why is this not something that we are doing more often? So you can really like infuse your own flavors. One of my favorite recipes is something called samgyetang soju. So samgyetang is a Korean ginseng chicken soup. The soju is not infused with chicken, but the chicken soup recipe infuses these herbs, like these sort of like Korean herbs and roots and bark. And that gives the chicken this like amazing sort of like restorative healing flavor and quality. But I was like, well, what if you were to capture this and put this in soju? Like, I'm just curious what would happen. And they sell these like, just like individual packs of things. So normally you would just take that pack and put it in the chicken and make your chicken soup. So if you just put that into like a bottle of soju, what would happen? And it was delicious. So it's something that we've also been serving at Orion Bar ever since we opened too. So you can get the soju itself, but then also we use that infused soju as a base for our cocktails.
And then you actually take the infusion and make a drink with it, or do people drink that in shots also?
You can do both. So you can definitely just drink the infused soju. It's also great because the longer that sits, the better it gets. It keeps extracting flavor. Even once you've drained the soju, you can add more soju in and keep going. But then also it's kind of like an amaro or an aperitif. It makes a really good already like infused alcohol that you can then layer into cocktails.
Yeah. And you know, shots and alcohols with herbs in it is not unusual. Your chicken one, though, takes it to even a more like savory level. Do you know what I mean? It's not just herbal. It has the meaty, the flavor of it. I guess it's a similar flavor profile to the soup that you have. But I think those kinds of savory infusions have always fascinated me because it's easy to make the leap to sweet. Do you know what I mean? Maybe fruit or rose or something like that. But when you actually take it to the savory side, I think it's a whole different experience.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's something like I really gravitate towards. I'm not a huge like sweet person. So it's really fun to experiment with that. And it's also wild from a Korean culture perspective because there's so many different flavors you can get from all these different like woods and barks and herbs that like can't even pronounce like the Latin names for them, but you know, they all do different things. They all have different medicinal qualities, and they all impart really different flavors.
Yeah. So those recipes look great. I see green plums. I see berries. The one that you mentioned, gosh, there were so many different things that you could pick to perhaps put in it, including things like licorice root, cinnamon, or even angelica. Yeah. Very good. All right. What's next?
All right. So then we are going to karaoke, or we're going to play some games. So in the book, you've gone through your easy drinks. Maybe you've leveled up with some cocktails. You've definitely had lots of rounds of food. So then I feel like it's time to have fun.
Yeah.
So maybe if you're going out in Korea or Koreatown, you'd be going to karaoke, which I think is very classically, the two are linked. And in my book, I'm like, I want to share drinking games, which again is in Korean culture, very popular, more so than you would think, or more so than you find here. I feel like in America, drinking games are really associated with like college.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Drinking.
Yeah.
Which I've definitely had my fair share. I love a good round of beer pong. But drinking games here, drinking games, Korean drinking games are made to be so simple that like a child can do them. And I think that's on purpose because then that means a drunk person can do them. So actually my sister, who's an illustrator, she illustrated all of the drinking games in the book. And it's just a few of so many. One of them that a lot of American audiences are now very familiar with is the apartment game, or Apatu, which is a song that was popularized by Rosé from Blackpink and Bruno Mars. It's such an old game. So I think it's really funny that it's like become into vogue again. But like, for example, that drinking game is just like you put all your hands in the middle, you stack them like an apartment tower, and then someone calls it a number, and then you alternate until you get to that number. And then whomever's number that is the person who has to drink, or alternatively, everyone who isn't that person has to drink, whatever the rules you want to make are. They're very like simple counting games. And I think it just, again, is like the goal is to help you have fun, break down barriers, get drunk.
Yep. And also it keeps people together doing something together. I think it's fascinating how that's kind of a common thread through this whole thing. Again, nobody's alone when you're doing these drinking games or when you're doing karaoke. I assume you could do karaoke alone, but you probably have an audience. People are watching you do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Very fun. Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the chapters in for the food then. Tell us a little bit about the food section. It says no party without an anju party. And then there's several different types of food that you would serve for that evening.
Yeah, the recipes for the anju really range from very simple bar snacks, kind of like I mentioned peanuts, or little fishies, or anchovies. So those are just like stir-fried anchovies that are served with peanuts, actually, in this case. And then kind of range from like noodle dishes to sort of shareable dips. Like I have a corn cheese queso. So that's a little bit of a fusion recipe that I came up with that's inspired by corn cheese, which is sort of a newer Korean barbecue side dish, with queso, which is the classic Texas cheese dip. And then, there's also there's a bit of an ode to samgyeopsal, or grilled pork belly, because that I think is a very classic way to be eating and drinking Korean style, as well as maybe a little bit more complicated recipes. Like there's like a Korean pizza that I love. And that's that's a bit of a project recipe, but I think cookbooks benefit from that. Having something where you're like, all right, I'm going to get all the ingredients. I'm going to make a day out of it, make a weekend out of it, and invite my friends over. So I kind of wanted to have a range of just something you're either making in bulk, maybe you're keeping in your pantry or your fridge to have whenever, to party, sort of like signature or feature party foods. But also like in the same way that any food that you drink with is a drinking food, any drinking food is just dinner. So it's not like, oh, you can only make this when you have to drink. A lot of them are very classic Korean dishes that just happen to be a thing people love to eat while drinking. And then also some of them are just things that I've created and developed over my tenure as first a pop-up chef, and then as a food developer, and now as a bar owner.
Yeah. And as a pop-up chef, you ran a restaurant that it was for food, correct? It wasn't I guess you maybe you could have a pop-up bar, but this was a food space that people could eat. What kinds of recipes and things did you find that people were really attracted to when you had the pop-up?
Yeah, I had a food pop-up that was called You Eating, which is still lives on as my Instagram and social media handle, for probably like 8 or 9 years. And my goal with that was to really explore the Korean food that I grew up with through the lens of other cultural cuisines that I was encountering as I was living in New York or traveling around, or just I grew up only eating Korean food. So it was such a joy and a wonder to discover all these other types of food, but then also connect it back to my heritage. It's crazy, like the more you eat, how something you've never tried before can really resonate with like a taste memory or nostalgia that you didn't know that you had. So that's something I really wanted to explore. I also happen to pop up mostly in bars. So maybe this was always something that was meant to be. So I definitely tried to make these foods that were like easy to eat as finger foods, easy to eat, like something you would kind of crave if you've maybe had a few drinks in, that sort of thing. So some of the every pop-up was a different theme. Like, for example, it was like Korean and Vietnamese, or Korean and Cuban, or I was sort of diving into a specific part of Korean food culture, like cold noodles or school food or school snacks is like a huge like subsection of Korean food culture, things like that.
Yeah. And a couple of the recipes use Spam. Tell us about that.
Oh, a lot of the recipes use Spam. Spam is definitely one of my comfort foods. It's something that my mom used to make for me when I would get home from school. She would fry it up with a little bit of like flour and egg and pan fry that and just serve that with rice and a little bit of like furikake. And that was one of my favorite after school lunch meals. So in the book, I have a recipe for that spam chon, which is like a spam pancake basically, and then also convert that into a spam chon musubi. So if you love spam, then you know like musubi is sort of the next logical step, and that's actually a dish that I've been serving at the bar since we opened as well.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be something for people. It's easy to buy and pick up and eat and have along with their one of their drinks. So you also have a whole section where you actually have Korean meets American cocktails. Tell us a little bit about that part of the book.
That's very driven by the cocktails that we serve at Orion Bar. And that's something that I developed in hand with my husband, Nick, who is the beverage director at our bar and the co-owner. And he's been a bartender and, drink maker his whole life. So his concept going into Orion is that we really wanted to do classic cocktails, like classic American cocktails infused with Korean flavors. So you'll see things like a jujube ginseng Negroni. So the classic cocktail is the Negroni, one of my absolute favorite signature cocktails. And that's made with jujube infused soju with a little bit of ginseng powder, which is like a thing you can buy at the Korean store, a little bit of like rice that it's shaken with to give it a really nice like silky texture. And then I would say like another favorite of mine is the Tashima martini. So I really wanted to make like a savory martini. So the soju here is infused with tashima or kombu in Japanese, which is a dried seaweed, which imparts a lot of umami flavor, as well as a little bit of shiitake. And then that's the base for a very like savory, as I mentioned, love a savory drink cocktail.
Yeah. I see a michelada also.
Oh, that one good. Is so good. So that's definitely Nick's recipe.
Yeah.
It's so like it's so many umami flavors in it, like pomegranate molasses sounds really sweet, but it's actually very umami and savory. And then, and then like the tomato and the kimchi, it has just like all these things that just make your like that, like the back part of your mouth, like salivate. It does that. Hits that very well.
Very good. Now we mentioned heading into is a Soju Party.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about it. It's a whole chapter on that.
Yeah, so Soju Party is just an alcohol party. I think it's more the concept of like, here's how you can have a Korean party at home. I think classically it's really structured, or the feature would be like you're doing Korean barbecue and then you also have alcohol and a little bit of a primer on like how you might accomplish that and all the different things that you need for it. And I also wanted to feature some other like party foods or party drinks. Like there's a watermelon soju hwachae. Hwachae is a Korean fruit punch. It has like a little bit of milk or like condensed milk, and it has a little bit of Sprite in addition to soju, in this case, as well as lots of fruit. And it's usually served in a hollowed out watermelon. It's just Like, doesn't it sound so refreshing as we're entering a heat wave here in New York? So yeah, it's just like things that you'll definitely want to like invite your friends over for.
Nice. So it's really sweet that people then could recreate that at home. Includes things like Korean pizza and then some nachos, things that people could probably pretty easily make at home and throw the party on their own. Then I did see the whole chapter on the drinking games. I think the illustrations are beautiful. I think it's so neat how cookbooks are combining photography and illustrations, fonts and, languages, different languages. I think it's fascinating how cookbooks, even just within the past couple of years, have kind of taken a leap to this combination of visual appeal. What was it like for your sister to do the illustrations for the book?
I totally agree that I feel like cookbooks have become so much more than just a method to teach you how to make something, and more of a visual like referendum or a visual way to communicate something, whether it's a cultural cuisine or someone's personal identity or a restaurant or a vibe, whatever it is, or just like cakes. I think that's what gives me so much joy in making cookbooks. So when I was concepting this book, I really wanted to find a way to like incorporate my sister, and she's an amazing illustrator. So I had in mind, like, I knew I wanted illustrations because there are some things that are just really hard to photograph. And I reached out to her and I was like, oh, what would you think about doing this? But also she's my sister and she's a tough cookie to work with. So she drives a hard bargain. My agent suggested like, well, what if you guys did sort of like just like a test, a paid test. So I did a paid test with my sister to do a couple illustrations with her. Just to make sure that like she was cool with working with my vision, and vice versa. And fortunately it worked out great. She, I think, ended up doing, I don't remember, somewhere between 35 and 50 illustrations. The drinking games, when we did them, we realized were such a visual like wow factor. We were like, this has to be its own chapter. Originally, I think I had concepted them as sidebars. And then she also illustrated a lot of the front matter of the book. So things like illustrating how to pour for people instead of doing like a stock photo shoot kind of someone pouring for someone else. I think that helps to really establish the visual identity and of the book by having these fun illustrations of like college kids pouring for each other with like their graduating years on their like varsity jackets, so you knew like who was older than I thought. She did some really like fun smart things to convey that. And then actually her illustration, since they were the first visual element of the book, became the thoroughfare for the book. Nice. It's really what ended up driving all the colors, the design. When Knopf, the publisher, put it together, they used her like color scheme. And I think it really inspired them and pushed them to make the whole book be a really fun, exciting, engaging book.
Yeah, that's neat. I think it's neat when something like that becomes the thread that, holds it all together. And Absolutely. It was the games. It wasn't, anything else about it was the idea for the book, but revolving around the illustrations that she made. So she obviously got the job. She passed the test. She was hired to do the work. And that's a beautiful section on not only the illustrations for the games, but, explanations for people who want to play them, how to do it. And again, have your own party. Or if you go out, you can know how to play them when you get there. Yeah. All right. And the final thing that we always have to think about when we are drinking is the last chapter. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So again, a night out drinking is not complete until you've resolved your hangover. And in Korean culture, the hangover industry is huge. You go to a Korean convenience store, there's a whole rack of hangover cures. There are glass bottles in the fridge, or these little like jelly pouches at the counter. All sorts of things that you're supposed to eat or take or drink before you start drinking, when you're drinking, after you're drinking. But I think even more interestingly, there's a whole culture of hangover food. So there's something called hangover soup or haejanguk, and there's tons of restaurants devoted just to making that. And I think the reason I have such a strong personal relationship with it is because my mom, who does not drink, loves haejanguk. It is one of her top foods. As kids, we would go with her to have haejanguk at like 11 in the morning. I always thought it was so funny because it would be surrounded by like old men nursing their hangovers. They're eating hangover soup and having more soju. And I was like, that's awesome. And
Hair of the dog, as they say, right? Having their soju with their hangover soup.
Exactly. They know how it's done. So yeah, I think like there's a whole culture of feeding your hangover. To give a little more context, hangover soup in Korea is not just one specific type of soup. It's again a whole genre. But usually it's something that is meat broth based. So very savory and deep, and something that's been like boiled for many, many hours to give you all of that like minerals and nutrition you might have lost while you were drinking. It's often packed with things like soybean sprouts, which are really good for curing hangovers. And then even things like dried Napa cabbage. And it is like the one, like not all hangover cures are proven to be effective, but hangover soup is 100% proven to be effective because at the very least your body needs hydration and nutrition to get back on track. So the hangover soup I highly recommend. The chapter itself has a lot of recipes for other types of hangover cures, because sometimes, like for example, you want something greasy, so like a kimchi grilled cheese will really set you right. Or maybe you want hair of the dog, so I do love a Bloody Mary the next morning. So there's a recipe for that, as well as just like instant ramen. Maybe you don't have any of these ingredients or time or honestly energy to make that. So there's even a recipe for like a hangover instant ramen you can make at home.
Yeah, can't go wrong with that. Now, you've mentioned your mom a couple times, your Uma, and I think one of the James Beard winners was also Sarah Ahn, who wrote the book called Uma. And I think that your conversation here with me today has really reinforced again the role of food preparation in the home, typically done by your Uma. And it's sweet how you mention her just in our conversation and then in the head notes of these recipes, and doing things with her when you went out to eat, like eating this hangover soup, even though she didn't drink. So tell me a little bit about your mom's role in all of this.
My mom, or my amma, my amma's role is huge in just like the food career I've taken on. She made 3 full Korean meals a day for us growing up, which is an insane feat. And a Korean meal is not just like you've made one dish and called it a day. Yeah. It's not like, you made like a pot roast and then you fed your family of 4, which, I mean, pot roasts are hard too. But in Korean culture, it's like you have to have a full spread of banchan, which are all individual dishes. And then you also have to have rice and soup and a main and, peel and cut fruit for your whole family at the end of it. And just like the management of like all the banchan she would do. She used to make her own kimchi. Like she was someone who was always chasing her own taste memories, which I think is something that's always really inspired me. And when I left home and I realized I could no longer take that for granted, that was the food that I like really missed the most. And that's actually was the impetus for what started my whole food journey. Is I wanted to revisit and recreate and evolve sort of the food that I grew up with that she used to make. And also I kind of was looking at the industry and seeing that at the time, especially a lot of Korean food was being made by and or sort of a lot of like Korean food portrayal in food media was by men.
Yeah.
And I agree that I think so much of Korean food culture and history is communicated through women. It's like your mom making you something but it was something her mom taught her, and she was an immigrant to America. So she had to do so much like work during a time when Korean food and Korean food ingredients were really not easily accessible. So I always just really wanted to preserve her recipes, iterate on them, especially as sort of like a third culture, second generation person. You know, I think like I see a lot of people like who are my peers or colleagues or like my age and generation doing this sort of thing around me too, where we're just like, we grew up with our mom's home cooking, but we also grew up with really American style food. So like, what is food to us? So I really, again, feel like that's what this book is about. And that's what I feel like I'm always kind of chasing on my end, both recreating my mom's taste memories, but also, you know, making my own.
Yeah. And then you have a family now of your own. And I think also the decision about what you're going to decide to feed and pass on to them.
It's really made me realize how incredible it is that she did any of that. I'm like, oh yeah, it's hard enough to feed a toddler anything, much, or even myself, honestly, when you're busy and you just don't want to cook. So
don't you think
feeding
toddlers is we probably do a whole podcast on this. My three children have all graduated from college. They're adults on their own. And I kind of took a hard line with feeding them. And I learned it from a woman who was not my own mom, but I kind of modeled what she did. And the point of it is that children are inherently smart about their hunger cues.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to not eat when they're hungry. And she always said, just serve them what you're having. If they don't eat, you know, our responsibility as parents was to offer them regular times where they could engage with food.
Exactly.
And then if they don't eat, it's no problem because you have a snack coming up in a little while, or, you know, before they go to bed, they can eat then. And their inherent hunger cues can lead the way. And I guess I always kind of did that. I think her thought was she didn't want parents to feel like they had to turn into short order cooks.
Mm-hmm.
You can cook for the family. You could maybe cook things that are component dishes. You could give them bits and pieces of it. But what do you remember, if anything, from watching your mom feed your 3 full Korean meals with maybe some toddlers that you remember at the table? What was her approach with toddlers?
I remember she always used to just make the things that she wanted to make. I did ask her this because I think I'd seen some like niece and nephews eating, and they're very much like, we're only eating buttered pasta and nothing else. And then also had interviewed her for a piece I wrote for Food Network about like how to maintain panchan, or how to just have the regular cycle of it. And she did say that like me and my sister were not very picky eaters, which I'm sure is just something she's saying in retrospect, and probably was not actually true at the time. So I remember being very picky about a lot of things. Like I didn't like kimchi at all as a kid, which I'm sure makes me a bad Korean. But like, I remember she was very, in my opinion, fearless about making the food she wanted to make.
Yeah.
For example, she would buy whole fish. She would butcher it herself, clean the fish herself, and cook it herself, like in our home. And that is something like I've even realized with other like Korean parents was not very common. So I think for me that like really demystified and took sort of the fear out of cooking. Like if there's something you want to make, you can achieve that. And that's something I've also realized recently I must be modeling for my own child. Because like I recently made kanjanggejang, which is a soy marinated crabs, but which requires you to have live crabs. So it's like had a box of crabs that he like came over and was
so
like,
fascinating. I'm sure it's great.
And then they started moving, and he like started screaming and like running away. And I was like, well, this will be a fun core memory.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. We used to have in Kentucky, when all the tobacco farms were kind of like going on the decline, they started to use and try to install fresh water fish farms and shrimp. So we would go to this place locally that sold farm raised freshwater shrimp. But of course, when you get it, you know, the head's on and everything. And talk about core memories. I mean, it's so fascinating watching my kids. You know, usually shrimp, you know, you see this little curled up thing, maybe with a tail, you might peel it, you might take the legs off, but the whole thing was just like totally fascinating to them, and very, I think it's great to expose them to that. To me, that's one of the risks of only letting them eat buttered noodles all the time, is that they miss all these things.
Exactly.
So
I think it's really cool for them to see where food comes from.
100%. So if anyone's listening that you think, am I taking this too far with my kids and the food and I think the depth and the breadth of it, we owe it to them to expose them to things like that. Because if we don't, who will? I just don't know. I feel very strongly about that. So I think it's wonderful that your mom, of course, did it for you, but it is fascinating once you become a parent to think, oh my gosh, how did she do that? 3 full Korean meals, and like, it's just all these little curiosity things start opening up once we have mouths in our house that we need to feed.
Definitely.
I think also for my mom, there were 8 children, she fed us every day, but there weren't the options for getting food that there are now.
Yeah, I agree.
We could literally sit here right now and order DoorDash to the podcast if we wanted to.
Yeah.
And have a tasting of Korean food, probably like, as a Korean restaurant down in Covington, we could order things. You could tell me what they are. And so it's just so different having availability. Yep.
Yeah. It's a very different culture than what we grew up with.
Yeah. So one other question, being from Kentucky, I'm curious about bourbon in Korea. Tell me a little bit about that.
Western alcohol is so interesting in Korea because there is very high tax on it. So it's extremely expensive to get whiskey. Koreans love whiskey. It is like the best. If you're ever visiting someone in Korea, bring them a bottle of whiskey.
They love it.
They would love it. And it's like 3 times more expensive for them than it is for you. And there's lots of even like tasting like rooms in Korea where they have many, many different types of bottle, and you can try different, shots or glasses of things. But like, I'm like, I could never go to Korea and like experience that because I'm like, it's so expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really fun to do here in the US. And if people want to do good bourbon tastings, I mean, there's a whole bourbon trail in Kentucky, and you literally can go into the distilleries and do it's usually 4 pours. You sometimes can pick them. It's usually about 1/3 of an ounce for each pour. You can put a little ice if you need to. You can drink it neat. You can add a little water if you want to. But tasting them side by side really does give you an opportunity to taste the difference in the barrel, the difference in the aging, the difference in the rye combinations with the corn and the wheat. And it's really a fun thing to do. So I highly recommend it. If you've never been to Kentucky, you've got to come and go on a bourbon tasting. It's a terrific
I love
way.
Kentucky. I've done a lot of the bourbon trail. That's so
great.
Fun. It's so amazing to see the different types of distilleries. And I'm a big whiskey fan.
Amazing. Yeah, very good. Well, I'm glad you've been able to visit and enjoy that. And I think as a bar owner, I think it's probably fun too, because then you can maybe have a connection or experience with something that you might be serving at your own bar.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So one last question as we're wrapping up, I love to ask is about cookbooks, since we are a Cookbook Love podcast. If there is, growing up, even with your mom or when you started out on your own, if there is a cookbook in your history that meant a lot to you that you would like to share.
I was also really hoping that this podcast would just be about us talking about all the cookbooks that I love, which we could have a separate episode just about. Let's talk about all the cookbooks I own. Here's behind me is many of them I have. It goes on to another shelf. I see you have so many.
Yes.
But growing up, we didn't have a lot of cookbooks. My mom had a few that she had brought over from Korea. But there's 2 that stand out to me. One is a cookbook that my grandma gave me, which a lot of the cookbooks in Korea are very functional, and they're very different than American style cookbooks, which is that they give you amounts, and then the steps are very like, cook this until it's done. And you're like, well, what does that mean? But the cookbook she gave me was it's called like 4,000원 meals or 4,001 meals, which usually translate to like meals you can make for $2.50.
Yeah.
Just amazing. So that was one of the books, which I still have. And another one that I got from my mom that she used to use growing up was a very 80s cookbook. Like it has aspics, and lots of like meat jellies and things that were like popular in the 80s. But it was called 365 Days of Cooking. And it had more than 365 recipes. It had it had instructions to make 365 meals.
So a lot of recipes, right?
Meals for 365 days, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then, Korean food, it's like you have all the different things. So it's like probably like 9 dishes a day.
Yeah.
And then the photos are so like amazingly 80s. And I'm like, again, who is making all of this? How? And then there's also like, okay, well, it's Chuseok, which is Korean Thanksgiving. So now here are the 20 dishes you have to make. And I was like, wow. The pressure on a Korean housewife is so intense.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think they felt it as that?
Yeah. That's like, especially Chuseok is a great example of that because it's a time when you have to make these really labor intensive dishes. And I think it's really dreaded by like all of the daughters-in-laws out there because they have to like go to their mother-in-law's house, get really judged, just toil away in the kitchen for like 10 hours just to like sit in the back of the kitchen and be like, oh my God, like I was a short order cook all day.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder what it feels like to be living with that dread all the time though.
That's why you need to drink.
That's true. It's true. I guess I always felt like if it's something that I really had to do and I couldn't get out of it, I tried to change the way I thought about it because I hated walking around feeling like I dreaded everything. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's just, and feeding children is something that you have a choice again, but I decided I was going to try to enjoy it. And I really tried to go into it with that. But those are 2 great books. I will see if I can scrounge up any links on the internet, link to those in the show notes. And I'd love to also link to how it's been so fun to talk to you, hear all about your book. We should do a separate podcast about cookbooks that cookbook authors love, not just about your book, but other books. But tell me a little bit about how people can connect with you online.
You can find me on Instagram or TikTok at You Eating. That's my last name, YOO, Eating. I'm also on YouTube. I share a channel with my friend James Park, who's Jamesy World, and that is called Kaka Studio, ka.ka.studio. You can find me at Orion Bar in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And later this month of July, I'll actually be at Tales of the Cocktail. I'm going to be doing a Korean cocktail pop-up with a few friends. Heda Shim, who's coming out with a Korean cocktails cookbook later this year, as well as our friend Jay Bay, who makes beautiful, amazingly innovative cocktails on Instagram.
Wonderful. And I know there's a link on your website with all the events. So if anyone's interested in meeting Irene and learning a little bit more about what she does in person, you can check out that section of her website. Well, it's been terrific to have you on the show. I thank you so much for your time and your beautiful new book, Soju Party, How to Drink and Eat Like a Korean.
Thank you so much, Maggie. It was so fun to talk to you.
Yeah, great to talk to you too. And I wish you nothing but the best with your book. Again, congratulations on your award. And enjoy meeting all the people. It's different meeting people who buy the cookbooks versus like coming into a bar or maybe even into your restaurants. So
for sure.
Enjoy those people as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green, and until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.